From the Bitcoin and Archive, here's a replay from the broader Bitcoin and Stack. Sometimes that means a past episode, sometimes an interview, and sometimes a guest appearance from another show. The headlines may have moved on, but the Bitcoin signal, market context, and practical lessons still hold up. If it's useful, it belongs back in the feed. Here's today's selection from the Bitcoin and Archive. Good morning. This is the Bitcoin and Podcast. I'm your host, David Bennett. We're going to do Cathedral Part 4 today, and I'm subtitling it Life Raft for reasons that you will come to understand. If you have not heard or read the write-ups that I've done on Cathedrals 1 through 3, I will give all of the URLs in the show notes for today's show so you can kind of catch up. But what Cathedral is a Silvopasture system that I am outlining here on the Cathedral series to hopefully get people excited about what can be done from just a standpoint of just using nature as technology, because that's essentially what we're doing here. We will have technology inside the Cathedral system. Yes, there will be computers. Yes, there will be automation. Yes, there will be a solar panel or two that even is roving around, and there will be drones. There will be like technology the way that you see technology, but Cathedral is a marriage of the technology that humans have built and the technology of God or nature or the universe, whatever it is that doesn't offend you. I'm looking at it as the technology of God, which far surpasses any technology that we've been able to build, because fusion energy has been going on since the birth of the universe, and we still haven't cracked that nut. So if you're thinking that somehow or another we have better technology than God, you'd be wrong. I'm just saying. So let me recap what we talked about in Cathedral 3. We were talking about the grazing alleys. All right? So we've got tree lanes. We've got 23 of them internal in the Cathedral system. And then there are lanes of graze in between each tree lane. So you can think of it as an empty space that is a long corridor that is bordered on both sides by a wall of trees. A wall, and I call it a wall because the animals cannot penetrate those tree lines, which we talked about in Cathedral 3. That comes out of the hedgerows. So the grazing lanes is exactly that. It's graze for cattle, for possibly pastured hogs, if you want to go that route, for chickens, llamas, alpacas. What else? There's all kinds of stuff that you could put out there. But this system, especially the Life Raft that we will be talking about today, is going to consist primarily of ruminants and chickens. And they are just in the grazing lanes. They are not inside the tree canopies, inside the tree lanes on either side of the grazing lanes. That's what a silvopasture is. It is pasture, or for lack of a better term, graze, and trees. And it's a oak savanna mimic. What that means is that it mimics the oak savannas of the Great Plains before we cut down all the oak trees to farm commodities from fence row to fence row, which really started in the 1970s, specifically after 1973. Then there's also the Great Savannas of Africa. And these systems create the most abundance of any system that there is. And I know that you'd be going, well, they don't produce grain unless you farm it. Yes, there's an abundance there. Well, they don't make cotton. Yes, there's an abundance there. This is really about food production, right? And again, you'll go, well, grain. Well, I'm talking animal protein. The amount of animals and the sheer tonnage of meat production available from an oak savanna just decimates any other system that we've been able to put together. So a silvopasture is a human managed, human built mimic of an oak savanna. And again, a lot of the particulars, if you're just tuning in, you got to go listen to Cathedrals 1 through 3. It's about 3 hours long at this point, and this is going to be a long series because this system has it's got a lot of pieces and parts that need descriptions. So the grazing lane in between the two tree rows is 150 foot wide. That's 5 passes with a 35-foot combine header, right? A combine is how we harvest grain and corn and all kinds of stuff and cotton and whatnot like that. And the header is at the front of the tractor, and it's that big bar that goes across the bottom portion of the tractor, and it's got the cutting head and the collection head, and it combines cutting and collecting and all kind. That's one of the reasons why the whole system is called a combine. So with 30 feet width of a combine header, you can make 5 passes around Cathedral's grazing lanes if you're not grazing, if you're farming. That's one of the things that makes Cathedral flexible, is that I've designed it to where you can either graze it or you can do something called alley cropping, which means that you can raise a crop of wheat or cotton or whatever it is that you want, possibly even corn, although I'm not a huge fan of corn because of the water consumption. But be that as it may, you may love corn. You can grow the shit out of it because you'll have around 640, 620 acres to work with inside the Cathedral system, because that's how much grazing or alley cropping lane that you have. And that's quite a bit of acreage. It really is. But Cathedral, in my mind, is really a graze system and not an alley cropping system. So I want to focus on the grazing issue. So again, we put the animals in either the east side or the west side. It doesn't matter. The tree lanes go north to south, so it captures as much sunlight as you possibly can. And again, this is a model. And models, when they, like any battle plan, pretty much falls apart when it goes into and actually gets started to get shot at in an actual battle. And another way to look at it is Mike Tyson when he says everybody's got a plan until you get punched in the face. But you got to have a plan. Even if you do get punched in the face, you still need to have a plan. And this is the model that I'm suggesting. It will be the case that if you try to put this in certain places, you won't be able to really go, to assure that the tree lanes will run north to south so that you can collect east-west light. There will be issues. And that is up to the imagination of the person implementing this system on, say, more of a hilly or more contoury kind of landscape, because you'll have to follow, you really shouldn't be doing straight anything when you've got contours. That can cause problems. That'll come in a later show when we start talking about how to manipulate the system on more of a hill or contour like landscape. But for now, just think flat, think square. So we've got enough acreage in graze. We've got about 630 acres to work with in just graze. So the animals go in to the system and they go through the maze in between the tree lanes all the way to the other side, where they exit about a year later. Okay, so this is the way that this system is supposed to work. Again, everybody's got a plan until you get punched in the face, but for now, we're not getting punched in the face, so we can dream. The tree lanes provide a lot of animal fodder along with the hedgerows that the cows should have access to for browse. And all of that combined with the graze that's on the ground, the grasses, the forbs, the legumes, should be enough that by the time the animals escape the other side, the animals to be harvested will be of a weight that can be harvested without losing money. Now, let's see here. Hold on for a sec. Yeah, that's right. And then in last week's episode, we talked about fencing and GPS collars and the daily movement of the cattle or the animals that are going to be in the grazing lanes. And that's sort of where we left it off. But I want to expand on the cattle, which are, and I had explained in last week's episode, cattle are followed by chickens. I want to really start pulling that particular system apart. So what are we getting out of this graze? You know, is it just animals? Is it just being able to pull, thousands of pounds of meat off of this thing at the end of the year for sale? Is it about thousands of pounds of chickens, thousands of pounds of hens, thousands of pounds of eggs while you're doing all this? Is it just the food production? That's part of it, but no, it's not just the food production. Because if it was just about the food production, then we're not really concerned about the most important thing in this system, in all natural systems, in a forest system, in a farm, on a ranch, in your backyard. If you've decided that you need to get rid of the grass in your front yard and put in a vegetable garden, then it's just as important there too. It's important everywhere there's dirt, and that is soil health. I can talk all day long about systems and types of trees and types of animals that I can put above the ground. And none of it matters unless we're really thinking about what's below ground level. That would be the soil, the living skin of the world. That we call it the soil horizon. And we could go deeper into that, but we really don't have to. We're going to be talking about, when I say soil, I just want you to think about anywhere between right where the soil meets the air and down below, let's say for our purposes here, 3 feet. 3 feet down. That's all I'm asking you to think about. Yes, we can go lower depending on where you are, but let's just think 3 feet. If you can get down that far. There are people that live on limestone slabs, whose name I will not mention right now, who lives on limestone slabs and has maybe 4 inches of actual soil. And my heart goes out to people like that because clearly that's an issue. But in West Texas, you don't get that. In Eastern Washington, do you know there's places in Eastern Washington that have 34 foot of topsoil? And that's not an exaggeration. There are actually places that it goes down to 55 to 60 foot of topsoil. So like real honest to God soil, not, half rock, not, ground up caliche. I'm talking soil horizon. Anywhere between 25 and 60 feet is not uncommon in Eastern Washington, the Palouse region of the United States. It's insane how much soil there is up here. But we're really only going to worry about the first 3 feet. Now, the amount of time that I've spent talking about soil health on this show is kind of makes people wonder, well, why is it a Bitcoin show? It's Bitcoin because there's other things that exist. And I believe that Bitcoin enables us to be able to think larger than what we've been able to think. That people haven't wasted their time really charging their imaginations up because they know, well, there's not enough money in the world to get that done. I think we're at a point in time, a point in history where that's about to change for the common person. I think that Bitcoin enables something like Cathedral. as big as it is, as clearly, even though it's a 1,000-year project that is supposed to go on for a lot longer than 1,000 years. And no, not everything in Cathedral would be built in the first year. It's impossible. This is building of a cathedral. It takes time. It is a multi-generational build. And that needs to always be remembered up front with all of these episodes of Cathedral. This is not something that we just have a construction crew run out to this 1,000-acre plot of land and just plant all the trees at once. It'd be nice, it'd be cool, but that's the building management portion of the Cathedral series, and we're not there yet. All right, but just understand that what we really have to look at when we begin this project is the health of the soil. And since it is the case that this project, I would really want the first iteration of Cathedral to be built on a blown out hayfield where the soil is damn near dead, just to prove a frickin' point. Or a commodity cotton field that's been so poorly managed with chemistry, herbicides, pesticides, that it's just a barren moonscape and there's not a single bacteria anywhere in that son bitch. Just to prove a point. But let's kind of back it up a little bit and talk about the soil health. It's critical to understand that ruminant animals and grasses co-evolved with each other well over 100 million years. The grasses that you see today were completely unlike any of the grasses or I don't even want to call them grasses 100 million years ago. God only knows what they actually looked like. But one thing is for certain, ruminants were built to eat grass, and they depend on that grass to live, breathe, reproduce, and grasses in turn absolutely 100% depend on being grazed. Otherwise, they will die. The ruminant without the grass dies, the grass without the ruminant dies, and we've done everything we can to take ruminants off of grass. And we are paying the price. Because those ruminants, not only do they help the grass by grazing it physically, they're pooping and urinating, and that amends the soil year over year over year over year. In the Great Plains of the United States, descriptions of grass coming up to shoulder level, anywhere between knee and shoulder level of a man on a full-grown horse, pretty much permeates the diaries of people like Lewis and Clark, I think they started in St. Louis and they found the Northwest Passage all the way up into the Pacific Northwest, right? And they described it all the time. Just huge swathes of grass. And then later on, when we started farming, the first farms started being put out in the Great Plains, people were talking about soil that looked like coal. It was so black, except it was loose and friable. It would fall apart in your hands. It wouldn't cake together. It refused to compact, and torrential rains could hit it. And instead of running off, it would run down into the soil and just be gone in an instant. And we don't have that anymore because we've done everything we can to divorce the ruminant from the grass. This is a terrible mistake. It is a terrible, terrible, terrible mistake. So what I'm proposing in the context of the Cathedral system is a subsystem called Life Raft. Think of a boat. And now think of the grazing lanes as the canal that the boat is going down. Not a river, not rapids. We're not doing class 5 here. Think more of like the canals in the Panama Canal, where there are no rapids. That was purposely designed to take cargo ships that are not going to be. They're not going to be doing rapids. They need still water, and they need it very, very deep. And they move very, very slowly through the Panama Canal system. Same thing here with the Life Raft system. But when we talk about what the Life Raft is, we really need to talk about how it's going to boost the soil health. Because without the soil health, you're not going to get really high quality, nutritious grass and forbs and legumes. And you're not going to have support for all the critters that live in the soil, like earthworms and dung beetles. And these things help till the soil without actually tilling the soil with a mechanical tiller. You know, we've got arthropods and little critters and big critters and all kinds of stuff, and they dig through the soil. And their whole job is to keep air and water moving through the soil by their tunnels and their burrows and all the rest of the things that they bring to the table. So cattle and their manure and their urine help with that. Chickens, with their scratching and their own pooping and their shedding of feathers, help all that. It's a technology that we don't really appreciate, because I think we grew up being taught that farmers were dumb and ranchers were just dumb, and they were all hayseeds and rednecks and hicks. And if you've met enough farmers and enough ranchers, you realize they're not hayseeds and hicks. They're actually really, really tuned in people, man. But let's get back to this whole thing with Cathedral and the Life Raft and soil health boosting, because the Life Raft is designed to, as it passes over a particular section of graze, by the time it passes that point, there is way more nutrition in the soil than there was. There's way more potential nutrition in the soil than there was. And the more times that the Life Raft passes that same point on a year-over-year basis, then we'll be able to grow more grass and more forbs and more legumes, and we'll be able to put more cattle on the Life Raft. We'll be able to actually put more chickens on the Life Raft. And every time this thing cruises down the grazing lanes, it's got more food every year. That's the whole point. That's why it's called a Life Raft. It's not about rescuing the animals. The animals actually are a raft, and everywhere they go, they leave behind life. It's a context. It's a philosophy that is important in the context of each one of these grazing lanes. Because think of it this way. Soil microbes exist in the soil. They happen to be very much related to the soil, to the microbes that are in a ruminant's gut. Why would that be? Well, let's think of it like a grass. Just think of a grazing lane in Cathedral, and it rains, and a raindrop was able to hit right on the soil, right between all the grass plants. And you really want grass to the point that a raindrop never really hits the soil, but at one point or another, one of these things is gonna find its way to bare soil. Right? You want as thick of a carpet as you can get to armor the soil, to keep it intact, to make sure it doesn't run away. But at one point or another, yeah, you're going to end up with some water hitting dirt, and it's going to splash up, and it's going to take a whole bunch of different microbes and archaeobacteria and regular bacteria and all kinds of stuff. And it's going to splash the leaves of the grass. And who comes through but our friendly neighborhood cow, who eats that grass? And they're eating the soil microbes that have been splashed up on those blades of grass. And then it gets into the cattle's rumen, right? To the cow's rumen, where it is moist, it is warm, and it is of an appropriate pH. And it's got all kinds of other food to chew on, because the cow is constantly eating grass. It's constantly moving carboniferous and nitrogen-containing compounds through its gut in the form of grass and legumes and forbs. So what does the bacteria do here? It has sex, and a lot of it. and it produces little bitty baby microbes, all like billions of them, trillions. Like what was a few thousand microbes can easily become a few billion microbes by the time that it exits the animal through its rear end in the form of a cow pat, which falls where? Right back on the soil. So what started as a few thousand or maybe a few 100,000 microbes is now numbering in the billions. And where do they go? They dive down into the soil. So the ruminant itself is actually a bioreactor. And its whole job is to amplify soil microbiology. Well, it's not its whole job. Its other job is to mow the grass, but they work in conjunction with each other. In our case right here for soil health, we really are concentrating on the amount of microbial amplification that is going on. Can we boost that? Is there a way that we can affect what kinds of microbes? Maybe we've got a soil, maybe we find out so much about soil microbiology of which we don't know a whole lot about, because it's like we know more about space than we know about the oceans. Well, we know a lot more about the oceans than we do about our soil as to what kind of critters are in there. Now, this is, again, I'm not being hyperbolic. We know less about soil than we do about oceans, which is a lot less than we do about space. And God only knows what we don't know about. But as far as I can tell, we know almost diddly squat about soil. So, what if we find out? What if we learn more and we find out we're kind of missing a whole class of microorganism here? Is there a way that we can brew that up and spray that on the grass and let the cows eat that and have those microbes amplified? Or do you want to build a whole factory with steam pipes and energy consumption and hooked to the grid and process managers and process engineers and hire all these? No, not to amplify something that a cow can do for free. See, this is why I go back to what I said earlier in the show, was that we're working with God's technology. And if we would read the textbook of God's technology, we'd be able to do a whole hell of a lot more for a whole hell of a lot less than we are. But no, we want fake meat. So what do? We build a factory. I don't even know how many megawatts of electricity some of these fake protein, fake meat manufacturers take to run, but I'll bet you that their process engineers get paid $250,000 a year. And I'll bet you there's more than one. And I'll bet you there's a lot more people than that it takes to run. Why not just raise a cow? The technology's already there. All we have to do is read God's textbook and say, oh, well, he's already answered all this. Look, there's instructions. There's instructions. Holy crap, this is great. But we don't do that. We don't do that because I think it's because we've been taught. There's a lot more to it, but I think a lot of people have been steered away from wanting to discover this because we've been told that cows are bad for the environment. That's a lie. We've been told that farmers are dumb. That's a lie. We've been told that ranchers are rednecks. That's a lie. I mean, like it's just, it goes on and on and on. And the more and more people lose interest and want to be a banker or a lawyer or a doctor and such, just like Willie Nelson's song, we end up losing not just this, I hate it when people call it, oh, we're losing this lifestyle. Screw that. I don't care about the lifestyle. We're losing a technology that made this planet run for way longer than we've been here. So again, that said, what if we used a way to discover, is there a depletion? Can we use man-made technology to discover whether or not we're missing a whole class of microorganisms in the soil? And if so, can we get them back in the soil, but not by using a whole bunch of fancy chemical and biological engineering equipment? We just use the cow. Yeah, there's a way to do that. That's one of the parts of the Life Raft, and we'll get into that. Is there a way to introduce large insects that have been depleted off of places like the common dung beetle, which is critical for pastures. And yet, the way we've been managing all this stuff by pulling all these animals off of pastures, we've lost all this. We've lost all this. It really does boil down to carbon. I mean, it's the biology. But if I need to really focus in on what's really missing, is it a class of microbes? Well, yeah, there's classes of microbes that are not there that probably should be. Is it the insects? Yeah, there's a lot of earthworms that should be in the plains of West Texas that are no longer there. Is it the dung beetle? Damn Skippy. But we need to start looking at what's the root cause. What's the root cause? When we get into these places that are turning into deserts because of chemical and conventional agriculture and poor ranching management practices, what are we really missing? Carbon. We're really missing carbon. And we need to put carbon back. And not because we're all going to die because of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. I don't care. Everybody is way too over the top on that. And this is coming from somebody who was global cooling is going to kill us. And then the ozone layer depletion was going to kill us. And then we went into global warming was going to kill us. And now they're just saying frickin' climate change. Well, welcome to the way the earth works. Climate change happens. And causing people to be afraid of it and making them think that there's something that we can do about it is simply to pad and line your own pockets with other people's money. It's fear marketing. That's all that is. But that does not mean that we haven't lost a shit ton of carbon out of the soil. We have. And it doesn't mean that we don't need to put it back, because we do. We need to put the carbon back. And that's one of the things that Life Raft does. So let's talk just a little bit about carbon. Why is it important? Because it helps give the soil structure. It does more than that. Hard carbon, or what I call recalcitrant carbon, which is basically charcoal. And we used to get that when the plains would catch on fire and dead grasses would burn away. Not all of it would actually burn. It would char, and it would basically leave behind a bunch of, well, if you've ever seen a field that's been burned, you'll see a bunch of black. That black is almost pure carbon. And then it rains, and then that black that carbon gets put into the very top half inch of the soil. That carbon holds about 7 times its weight in water chemically. It's like a sponge, except a sponge I can squeeze and the water will come out. Can't do that with carbon because the water is held chemically, and that's called adsorption. AD, as in antidominum, right? Adsorption, adsorption. A sponge is AB, as in boy, AB absorption, and that's different. That is a physical collection of water, and if you compress the medium of which that water is held, the water will leave. That's not adsorption, right? So the carbon chemically holds on to 7 times its weight in water. As the macrofauna, the big insects, earthworms, and all the way down to the smaller stuff, that carbon starts to get incorporated in the lower levels of the soil. So now when it rains, we've got a whole bunch of holes because of the worms and the dung beetles and whatnot like that. So the water and air can infiltrate, and it gets down to the lower levels where it charges the carbon that's down there with water. So now roots can go deeper, and under drought conditions can remain hydrated for way longer, because like you can squeeze a sponge and get the water out. You can also put the sponge filled with water like out on a grate in the middle of Texas summer in full sunlight, and you'll come back in 1 hour and that thing will be dry as a bone. If I have chemically wet carbon, like as a powder, like just ground up charcoal, and not the kind of charcoal for your grill. We're talking just almost pure carbon, and it's soaked in water for like, let's say 5 hours. And then I drain all the water off and I put a pile of wet carbon next to the sponge that is wet. And I come back in an hour. You know what's not dry? The pile of carbon. It's still sopping wet because the water is chemically held. It doesn't evaporate. This is critical for like the Great Plains. This is critical for drought-stricken regions. You need carbon in the soil. But here's the funny thing about carbon. We shouldn't have anywhere close to the amount of carbon that there is. And that's a paradox. So maybe you're asking, what are you talking about? What the hell are you talking about? I mean the creation of carbon in the nuclear furnaces of suns doesn't make sense from a quantum level, from a nuclear fusion level, and those two things, the quantum level and the nuclear fusion level, they kind of work together. They actually work together. So I'm going to try to describe this. The way you get carbon is you have to have fusion, nuclear fusion. So when the Big Bang happened, we had hydrogen and we had helium, and a lot of people are told that. But what people do not tell you is that there was actually quite a bit of carbon that was laid down at the Big Bang. And people go, well, that's impossible. No, it's not. Well, first of all, here's how carbon's made. You got two helium atoms that collide, and that forms something called beryllium. You are very, very close to carbon-12 with beryllium-8. And beryllium-8 means 8 neutrons or 8 protons in the nucleus. Carbon-12 means 12 protons or neutrons in the nucleus. But all you need is one more helium atom to combine with that beryllium in a fusion way, and you'll get carbon-12. But here's the problem. It's easy to get two helium atoms to collide into each other. And helium is built from two hydrogens, just so you know. So two hydrogens come together, they get married, they have a baby, it's called helium. All right, two heliums come together, they get married, they have a baby, it's called beryllium. Now, if you introduce a third, you'll end up with carbon. But the beryllium-8, when after the fusion of two helium atoms occur, it is so unstable that one beryllium atom exists for about 1/trillionth, actually a fraction of 1/trillionth of a second. It's something like 10 to the negative 16 seconds. That's like a dot, 0.16 zeros, and then 1. That's how many seconds a beryllium atom lasts for. That's not a lot of time. And you need beryllium to remain being beryllium long enough for carbon to hit it and fuse with it in a nuclear fusion type situation. But at 10 to the negative 16 seconds, fat chance, until you start talking about something called Hoyle's resonance. Hoyle's resonance, all it is, there was an astronomer named, I think his name was Fred Hoyle, right? And he predicted that there was going to have to be some kind of resonance for carbon to actually form, because we already knew at the time of Fred Hoyle's life that beryllium didn't last very long, and that it didn't make sense that we had the amount of carbon that we have in the universe. Turns out his theory, the resonance theory of the creation of carbon from Fred Hoyle, was indeed correct. It so happens that if you have anywhere close to a beryllium atom, a helium atom, there is a resonance that just happens, and it attracts that helium to the beryllium in a way that if that resonance wasn't there, we would not have carbon. We would not in the amounts that it would take to create, RNA, DNA, protein, life. There would be no life in the universe without Hoyle's resonance. That's how important this thing is, which is why I'm spending time on it here. Because under any other circumstances, we would not have the amount of carbon that we have. And that affects everything, because every rock you pick up, most of it's carbon. Whether it's limestone, whether it's granite, I mean, dude, pick basalt. It doesn't matter what rock it is. If you're a geologist, or if you're thinking about becoming a geologist and you don't know this, understand that most of the material inside of any rock you find, except if you find a rock of gold, yeah, well, congratulations. No, that doesn't have carbon in it. Not much anyway. It's got gold in it. But rocks, like crystalline rocks, like quartz, like granite, it's mostly carbon and aluminum and stuff like that, but mostly carbon. So if it wasn't for Hoyle's resonance, solid mass wouldn't even be able to form, at least not in the way that we're used to. There would be no such thing as granite. There would be no such thing as quartz. You kiss all this shit goodbye. So the other thing about this is that it kind of goes into quantum mechanics, because if you think about what quantum is, it's like, it's a probability. It's like Schrodinger's cat, right? It's like there's a cat inside. The Schrodinger cat experiment is a thought experiment where there's a cat inside of a box and you can't see in it. You cannot see inside the box. And there is a vial of poison that if that glass vial gets broken, that cat is dead. And as long as the vial doesn't get broken, the cat remains alive. And then there's some kind of armature that if it gets hit by a cosmic ray, then it will activate the armature, and the armature will slam against the glass, and the glass will break, and the cat dies. And you put everything together inside this box, and you never know whether or not the cat is alive or dead, because you can't detect the cosmic ray coming through, the cosmic particle, right? Because you can't see it, you don't know what's happening inside the box. And the only way you'll ever be able to tell what's inside the box is if you open the box, and the minute you do that, you do the following. You do what's called collapse the probability wave. There's a probability that cat is either, there's half a chance, or let's see, there's 50% chance the cat's dead and 50% chance that the cat's alive. And as long as you keep that box closed, that probability rotates. It's either alive or it's dead at the exact same time. It's like it lives between two different states. And then you open the box, you collapse the probability wave, you discover whether or not the cat is alive or dead. That's the Schrodinger's cat model. Same thing with beryllium. At any given time, it could decay back into hydrogen within that 10 to the negative 16 second window that you have, that beryllium is still, together. At any point in that time, it could already have decayed, or it could remain beryllium. What collapses the probability wave in this case is Hoyle's resonance, causing another helium to collide, or at least attracting it, causing a resonance where everything's simpatico and dance partners start really getting into the groove with each other. And that's what happens with beryllium and another helium atom, and you end up with carbon. So Hoyle's resonance is the thing that collapses the probability wave for the universe so that we have as much carbon as we have. And again, if we didn't have that, you wouldn't be listening to my voice right now. And that's a fact. You can go talk to any physicist about this and they will corroborate me. So if carbon is this important to life, then certainly we want to have carbon in the soil. And yes, we do. We want a lot of it. And here's where Life Raft comes in. Now, in last Wednesday's episode, the Cathedral 3, we talked about how the cows are moved every morning. And then after the cows are moved, the chickens that are running behind the cows are moved up, right? So the cows graze for an acre and a half, and then they get moved up, and then the chickens, which are like 2 or 3 days away, and we'll explain that here in a second, they get moved up, right? So why? And that's to break the fly cycle. Cows will when they poop, on the ground. Flies come in, they lay their eggs almost immediately. If there's any flies present, and there always are flies present, they lay their eggs in the poop because it's a great place to rear their little fly children. It takes 3 days for the maggots or the fly larvae to emerge as adults and break out of their larval casing or their pupa or whatever you want to call it, and then fly away. And they cause problems for cattle. You can get really bad fly strike. And it's not just cattle; it's any animal that's out there in the field. And if you got enough flies, you'll end up with fly strike. And this shit is awful. You don't want it on your animals. But if you drag chickens, so wherever the cows were 3 days before, if you put chickens right there, okay, you got cows, they poop, and you move them off and you let that area rest for a day and then 2 days. And on the third day, like Jesus rising from the dead, you put chickens on that same spot, because that's the day that the fly larvae are going to emerge as adults. But before they get to do that, if you've got enough chickens covering it, they're going to scratch all that cow poop, and they're going to get the larvae, and they're going to eat it, and they're going to convert the fat and the protein and whatever else is in fly larvae. They're going to convert it to eggs and meat for free. And they're going to completely scratch away and break down all those cow pats and get them more soil contact so that the critters, the billions and billions of amplified microbiology can start contacting the soil, and then they start dropping down into the soil. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff that goes on, but that's the basic thing. But let's look at it differently. Let's look at these animals as being on a raft. The cows are the bow of the boat. The chickens are at the aft of the boat. So just keep that in your mind, and it's floating. This life raft is floating up and down and back up and down all the way through the maze of the grazing lanes until it comes out to the other end. But the chickens are never more than 3 days behind the cows, and they're never closer than 3 days behind the cows. So if you look at the boat as 3 days long, the cows are at the bow going forward, and the chickens follow up at the very back end of the boat called aft. But there's more to it than that, because the boat is on water, and the bow of the boat has to blaze through that, or has to cut through the water. That's why a boat hull is shaped the way that it's shaped. But then at the back of the boat, as the boat's moving on, you can see the wake of the boat. So there's the boat, there's the water before it, and then there's the churned up water behind it. So think of that whole system together. Now let's go back and revisit what happens day after day after day on the grazing lanes of Cathedral. We've got the cows. We got the cattle herd at the front. We got the chickens in some kind of mobile coops behind. We've got fencing between them so that, we talked about building a new paddock in front of the cows and then moving the cows in. Maybe there's e-collars because, we'll get to that here in a second. But then, so the cows move up, and then you move the chickens up. And basically, you're just moving the whole boat, right? So there's this daily rhythm of motion, soil work, fertility work. But we could do a little bit more and add to the system. Instead of just moving the cows up and then moving the chickens up and essentially moving the life raft forward, we need to prep the water before the boat. We become the keel of or not the keel, but is it the keel? I can't remember. The very front part of the boat that splits the water. We can be that. So let's revisit the daily workflow. Got a guy, comes in on his four-wheeler, and has got some stuff with him. What's that stuff? Biochar and seeds. Okay, so, and we've talked a little bit about this. Right before the cows move up into what's going to be their new acre, acre and a half paddock, we define what area that we want, and let's say it's an acre and a half. We don't build the fence. Let's just say that we don't. Let's say we're using e-collars. So there, we don't have the labor of building a new fence, that even if it's step in post, even if it's easy, if we can get away from it and the e-collars work and keep the cows exactly where we need them to be, then let's do that. Then all I have to do is get on my four-wheeler or my little tractor that's out there in the field, and I drag a broadcast spreader behind it. And that spreader has biochar and maybe 90% biochar and 10% seed. Because I want to, make sure that I've got like new forbs and new legumes coming in, because there can be a problem with that. Well, I'll cover it, but let's just say that I want to make sure that I've got I'm constantly spreading more seeds of forbs and some other grasses and legumes, and it's all mixed in with that. So then I have an option. Do I spray that entire paddock before the cows move on there? Because at this point, the seed and the biochar has fallen in between all the spaces of the grass that's grown up that these cows are going to eat and is like laying against the ground. I have an option as to whether or not I want to go through and pull a spray rig along with a broadcast spreader of seed and biochar and spray compost tea in a diluted form across that same thing, which would do what? It would, and I've talked about compost tea before, you get good compost, you bubble it in a whole bunch of air and water in a chamber for about 3 days, and you're sort of acting like a cow, except you have a chance to make adjustments because you can adjust pH, you can adjust feedstock as to like whether are you going to put in fish meal, are you going to put in algae meal, are you going to put in brown sugar, molasses, because what you decide to feed this bubbling mass that the compost is providing all the microbial community that you want, fungal, bacterial, you name it. And depending on what you feed it, you can adjust it to be more bacterial or more fungal, and a whole raft of stuff in between. But let's just say that I want to make a 50-50 mix. I want just as much fungal stuff as I want soil microbial or soil bacterial stuff in my compost tea. And I just spray that over the grass and the biochar and the seed mix, because if the seed germinates, the first thing that root hair is going to touch is it's going to be inoculated with bacteria and fungus. And as it grows into the soil, it's going to carry all that through it. Most people, when we buy seed at the store, they do everything they can to sterilize that shit. And that's not good. But here we have the chance to just pump huge amounts of biology into that system. And every blade of grass would be coated with a very dilute solution of compost tea that has both fungus and bacteria in it. Especially, we want soil back. We don't want disease causing bacteria. So we're not going to brew that. We don't want disease causing fungus. We're not going to be brewing that. It all boils down to the compost that you start with, because the compost is soil fungus. The compost is the bacteria that belongs in the soil. That's compost. We just want to amplify the living crap out of it. So we spray it all. Now what happens? We move the cattle up. The cattle do two things. They eat the grass that has had a whole bunch of appropriate soil microbiology sprayed on it, and it goes into their rumen, where it does what? Gets amplified like a boss. I mean, from 100,000 to 100 billion, that's a lot of amplification. So now I can use the cattle. Not only am I going to get their meat, not only am I going to get them to do some other stuff, right now they're performing a job for free, and that is massive amplification of microbiology. Now, that microbiology is also soaked into the carbon. And remember what I said about carbon and its ability to adsorb water. It's going to also adsorb all of the microbiology, and it's going to carry it with it wherever it goes because it's sticky. It's like glue. You can think of it that way. So I spray water and bacteria and fungus on this biochar. It's going to stick to it and never come off. And it's not going to have to wait very long either, because as the cows are eating the grass and amplifying my microbiology and pooping it out in massive amounts on the other end, their weight is stomping all over the biochar and the seeds. And they're pressing the seeds and the biochar into the ground, or at least making it have really good contact with the soil. As those cattle move off to the next paddock, I've done everything I need to do to prep that. And this comes in, this should come in later, and hopefully I won't forget it. It's in my outline here, but you never know about me. Then we're letting that area rest, and it's been pooped on. We've got carbon in the soil now, and let's say we put about half a ton, or like maybe 50 pounds to 100 pounds of biochar per acre. Or we could go higher than that. We put, 10% of whatever that is new seed, right? Which is cheap. It's cheap for an acre. This is not an expensive proposition. And the biochar we make on site, but we haven't gotten to that part of Cathedral yet. But just understand that I don't intend to pay for the biochar. I intend the biochar to pay for itself. And again, that's a whole other episode. So I have, in that one pass, with a small tractor, a spray rig, and a broadcast spreader, I have reseeded. I have put brand new carbon into the ground. I have put a whole bunch of biology all over the thing. I now have the cows come through. They are going to amplify the massive amounts of biology that I already laid down. They're going to amplify it, and they're going to make sure that the carbon is inside the soil, or at least in such contact with the soil that it's not going to wash away. And then I've got a brand new seed bed that is ready to germinate with all the biology it will ever need for its roots. And those roots are going to carry that biology down into the soil in one pass, in one single pass. And then using the cattle as muscle to dig all that into the soil. But I'm not done. No, not by a long shot, because 3 days later, here comes the chickens. What do? They're going to get a hold of all of that manure, and they're going to rip it apart, and they're going to scratch it, and they're going to get all of the fly larvae out so that we do not have fly pressure on the cattle. So now they're doing their job. And then they're putting down extremely high nitrogen manure, because chicken manure is completely different than cow manure. Cow manure doesn't have that much nitrogen in it. Chicken manure, oh my God, it's called hot manure. And if you were to take a whole bag of it and throw it on your tomato plants, you would burn your tomato plants. It would get nitrogen burned because there's too much nitrogen. But as they're scratching the cattle manure into the ground. They're scratching the biochar and the seeds even deeper. And you might say, well, they're probably going to eat the seeds. Well, maybe, except I plan on feeding these chickens like supplemental grain, or, we'll get into that. But I mean, they're not going to be all that excited about anything but the fly larvae, right? So yes, will I lose seed? Yeah, I'll lose some, but I'm not going to lose it all. I'm going to keep enough of it. And then they're going to be scratching their own poop into the ground. And that high nitrogen is going to mix with the seeds, and it's going to mix with the biochar, which biochar also buffers nutrients. So there won't be a situation where there will be a whole lot of burn, even if I put a whole bunch of chickens down. That's the back end of the raft. Then as the raft moves on, we've got the wake. It's what's left in the wake. It's all this torn up manure. It's all these flies that got eaten. It's all this high nitrogen manure from the chickens. It's all this biology laden cow turds that have been ripped apart in the field. It's literally going to look like a wake at the back end of a boat at full speed. But then I'll do something else. After the chickens are moved, I'll get back on my tractor and I'll probably put down even more carbon and even more biology with a spray rig and a spray spread or a broadcast spreader. I probably won't put seeds in there because I can't guarantee that the seed gets seed soil contact, which is critical. So I think that would be a waste of seed. That's the essence of the Life Raft. That it's a raft, and as it moves through the grazing lanes, what it leaves behind is way more fertile than what happened before it, even though all the grass has been mowed to the ground, which is a whole other thing, but I don't want to get into that one right now. So that's sort of the way Life Raft works. Now, this Life Raft happens to be 150 foot wide and about, an acre and a half. That'd be about like 4 acres long. So it's a big raft, right? Because I got to have cattle from hedgerow to hedgerow, and I've got to have chickens from hedgerow to hedgerow. But as the raft moves through the Cathedral system, it takes about 365 days to get to the other end. So does that mean, now this is where things change a little bit. Remember all the seed that we've plugged into the ground. Let's say that it's mid-spring and we've got no more issues with frost. The seed that we've laid down, it's going to germinate between 7 and 14 days. And it's going to start growing new plants unless some kind of disaster happens. Now, what happens if instead of choosing seeds that are only for some new grasses and new forbs and new legumes, what if I also drop cover crop seed? What happens then? Oh, shit. Okay. Some daikon radish, or what's also known as tillage radish, hairy vetch, some annual ryegrass. You don't want perennial rye. Don't even think about it. You don't want it. But annual rye, oats, that's an annual plant that's really good. Maybe I do a 15-way cover crop at the bow of the boat, at the bow of the Life Raft. In 7 to 14 days, not only will the grasses be growing and the forbs be growing and the legumes be growing, I will have an entire cover crop. You know what I could do with that after it becomes fully grown in about 30 days? I could probably put a whole other Life Raft behind it. I could probably put a whole other set of cows and a whole other set of chickens back at the front of the system and have a whole other crop of animals come through and feed on the seeds or the cover crop that was laid down by the cows that came before it. See how this is starting to work? And all the time that those plants are alive in the field, they are pumping carbon from the atmosphere into the soil, adding to the carbon bank that I've already laid down with the biochar. If I do the exact same thing, if I'm in a place where I can, let's say I can do this. Let's say I'm in West Texas, man. I mean, I can grow stuff from. Let's see, when it's like it gets really bad in, let's say late October. Let's say everything shuts down. Photosynthesis just shuts down. It's too damn cold to grow. And let's see, January, February, March. Okay, so end of March. So I have April, May, June, July, August, September, October. Okay, so 7 months. I'm actually going to just say 8 months. Let's say in West Texas, I know I've got 8 months of growing season. If it takes 30 days for the Life Raft to move, or from 30 days from the time the Life Raft moved off of its spot to where a full crop of cover crop that can be used as graze, and it comes up, then it's a calculation of how much poundage is there and how many cattle that can support. That's just a mathematic problem. But I could run another set of cows and chickens behind it, and I would do the exact same thing. I would put down more biochar, I would put down more cover crop seeds, and I would put down more biology, let the cows come in, stomp it all down, eat it all down, press all the seeds and blah, 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 and then let the chickens come through, rinse and repeat. And guess what? 30 days later, probably set for another set of cattle to come through. And all this time, the grass and the forbs and the legumes, they're it's not that they're being outcompeted by the seeds that I'm putting down. It's that there's so much forage that the grasses would have time to recover while the cows are eating all kinds of other crap. And it's just life raft after life raft after life raft after life raft. So instead of doing it 1 time per year, I'm doing it 7 times per year. Let's be conservative. Let's say I can only do it 5. I can only run 5 herds of cattle and chicken before photosynthesis shuts down for the year. What's that worth on the same piece of land? Just because I'm trying to figure out, well, if these cows weigh this much and they're going to be mob grazing and they're going to be shoulder to shoulder and they're going to be stomping all over thing, then and I know that seeds to be able to germinate properly need good biology and good soil seed contact. This is just a way to integrate those two things. So now I've got life raft after life raft after life raft after life raft moving through the river of the grazing lanes inside Cathedral. The cattle have hooves. They're seed stompers. They're biomass consumers. The chickens, they break the fly cycle. They mix fertilizer. Compost tea is just this huge microbial wake in as the boat moves through. This is the way that I think of God's technology. Just how do you sequence them? In what way? How do we make the most appropriate use of each one of these critters' jobs, and what can we do ourselves as a third critter to add and enhance depleted soil? This is it. This is the way to do it. It's not the only way to do it, but in my mind, dude, this works. Does it? Again, all battle plans are met with resistance on the battlefield. Everybody's got a plan until you get punched in the face. I get it. But we got to have a plan. We got to have something to be able to adjust when the fist meets the face, when the battle plan meets the battlefield. We got to have something. This, in my mind, works. You'd have to adjust seed mixes, maybe put on too much compost tea, maybe we find out that really upset the stomachs of the cattle. Maybe we need to dilute it even more, or maybe we don't even spray it at the beginning at all. Maybe we find out that the cows really don't want that much. They're really not going to do that kind of job. Fine. Then we put the biochar and we put the seed on. We let the cattle stomp it. We let the chickens come through, and after the chickens are done, that's when we spray with biochar. But it can all be done within probably a 4-hour period. The spreading of the seed, the spreading of the biochar, the movement of the cattle, the movement of the chickens, and then the spreading of the compost tea. I don't see that taking more than 4 hours every single day. Is it labor? Yeah. I'm sorry. Farms and ranches are labor. I don't get this. That's just too much work. Well, what else you got to do? Shit, man. Don't you want to be outside? Okay, look, a lot of people don't want to be outside, but for those people who want to be outside, this would be like what's the guy say in Aliens? A day in the Corps is like a day on the farm. Every meal a banquet. Every paycheck a fortune. That kind of shit. If it's something that you don't want, then you've stopped listening to these episodes. That's okay. I'm just saying labor's involved. This is not that much labor. And you're having huge mammoth leverage against depleted soils with Life Raft. It makes sense. And it's going to continue to make sense because right now I want to read you this piece from John Kempf and Acres USA. And it's called The Take Half, Leave Half Fallacy. Now, John Kempf, before we begin on this one, John Kempf wrote this July the 1st of this year. So he just wrote this. He's an Amish feller. I think he lives in Ohio or Pennsylvania. He's the founder and president of Advancing Eco Agriculture. Advancing Eco Agriculture is, I think that's AEA. Advancing Eco Agriculture, I think is the name of it. He's one of my all-time favorite podcasts to listen to. It's called Regenerative Agriculture Podcast with John Kempf, Kempf. He's highly regarded in regenerative agriculture, if you catch the tongue-in-cheek meaning of that one. But he has a tendency to be able to piss people straight off because the things that he thinks of is different than the way people that are in farm and ranch have been thinking about things. And the take half, leave half fallacy is going to be something that really pisses grazers, ranchers, and other folks that are interested in pasture health. Is going to piss them straight off. So let's get into it from John Kempf. A group of dairy and beef producers approached me recently and said, John, we have a problem. We want to improve our soil health, but despite implementing the best intensive rotational grazing practices for 20 or 30 years, we've made no progress in improving our soil organic matter. In fact, we've gone backwards. I started asking around, and it turns out this is a common phenomenon. There are hundreds of operations that have this challenge, so I started digging into grazing management systems more deeply than I have in the past. And I came to the conclusion that we have a foundational failure in understanding how different types of plants move sugars around and how that should translate into effective management. This conversation is focused around forage production, but it is equally true with how we're growing annual vegetable crops or annual grain crops or even tree fruit. We need to really understand how different plants move sugars around at different life stages because that determines the plant's optimal expression. Take half, leave half? The prevailing idea in grazing management is that to build soil, we need to take half of the forage and leave half of the forage, while occasionally, but not on a regular basis, grazing aggressively and removing the majority of the forage. But there isn't a lot of foundational guidance to describe why to do this. Why and when should we graze more aggressively? Why and when should we leave half of the forage behind? To help answer these questions, we need to understand how different types of plants partition carbohydrates. First, consider a grass plant. A clump of grass has a very large fibrous root system. These large root systems are what grasses are celebrated for. A tremendous amount of root biomass they have. A single rye plant, an annual grass, can have a root system that is more than a mile in length. But when a grass plant produces sugar through photosynthesis, where does it send those sugars? The numbers I'm going to present are variable based on different soil conditions, grass species, and field conditions. They will, of course, differ. They are not hard and fast numbers, but directionally, they're correct. Where the plant sends sugars changes based on the stage of plant growth. I'm going to focus on the stage of plant growth that is just before the bloom stage, at the end of the vegetative growth stage, and before the reproductive stage. During the reproductive stage, all plants devote most of the sugar they produce towards seed production. There are 4 different sinks for the sugars produced during photosynthesis. 2 of these are above ground, the vegetative biomass and reproduction, which is seeds, blossoms, flowers, etc., and 2 are below ground, the root biomass and the root exudates. This applies to any type of plant. For a grass plant that is just approaching the bloom period, the portion of sugars the plant seeds to produce above ground vegetative biomass is roughly 40%, and the amount allocated toward reproduction is roughly 10%. About 45% of the total sugar energy will go to root biomass, and 5% will be dedicated to root exudates. The important point here is that a grass plant stores its surplus energy primarily in its roots, not in root exudates. This is why these grass plants have such huge root systems. Now, we've been told that the root system gets pruned proportionally to the top of the plant being removed. That grazing, or cutting 50% off of the plant, causes 50% of the plant's roots to be sloughed off. The problem is that isn't true. It's dead wrong. There's a lot of literature to describe this phenomenon. 50% of forage removal, in fact, produces exactly 0 root removal. 0. Root dieback only begins at 50% removal of above ground biomass. At 100% of forage removal, there is 25% root dieback. Those outlier boundaries are fairly well established in the literature. Between 50 and 100% of grazing or cutting, somewhere between 0 and 25% of the roots die back. What this means is that grasses don't build a lot of soil organic matter or soil organic carbon until we take them all the way to the ground. You have to graze them into the dirt. This is consistent across warm season and cool season grasses. Building long-term organic matter through exudates. Christine Jones has some very interesting research on how much of the sugar energy in each of the 4 sugar sinks is held stable in the soil as organic matter for the long term. Reproductive carbohydrates are typically removed as grain, but she discovered that only 10% of the carbon that is contained in vegetative biomass remains stable in the soil for the long term. Long term meaning 24 to 36 months. In other words, it cycles very quickly. It gets released as carbon dioxide very quickly. So, 90% of the carbon contained in vegetative biomass, whether it's a cover crop on the soil surface or even if it's incorporated into the soil, tends to cycle very quickly and is released as carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere in a very rapid manner. Of the root biomass, 60% of its carbon remains in the soil in the long term. When you have root dieback or root pruning of 25% of the root biomass, that dead root biomass gets converted into organic matter through decomposition and microbial digestion. But the important aspect of this is root exudates. Christine Jones says that greater than 90% of all of the carbon sent out as root exudates remains stable in the soil. These exudates are complex humic substances that have a half-life of decades. So, if you want to build soil organic matter in the long term, you have to build lots of root exudates in the soil profile. Forbs are extraordinary exudators. Forbs, or broadleaf plants, are plants that are not grasses and they are not legumes. For example, a dandelion, chicory, plantain, thistles, etc. What does the root architecture of these plants look like? They have large taproots with small lateral roots. They don't have a lot of fibrous root systems like grasses. Let's compare forbs to grasses in terms of where the sugars the plant produces are allocated. Again, we're talking about the bloom stage, just prior to the reproductive period. The vegetative biomass above ground looks very similar to that of grass. A 40-10 split between biomass and reproductive elements, but below ground it looks dramatically different. Only about 15% of the sugars go towards root biomass compared to the 45% of grasses, and about 35% is devoted to root exudates compared to a mere 5% in grasses. We see that the sugar sinks for these two types of plants are incredibly different. A broadleaf plant does not store surplus energy in the root system. It stores its surplus energy outside the root system as root exudates. And these forb plants are known for having exceptionally strong relationships with the soil microbiome, with mycorrhizal fungi, with bacteria, with algae, with protozoa, etc., etc. Forbs are not wasting the energy they're sending out as root exudates. They will be able to extract those nutrients when they need them. So, if root exudates are how you build long-term soil organic matter, you can do so much more effectively with forbs than with grasses. Grasses hold onto their carbon. They store it in their root biomass. They don't store it in root exudates. Forbs store their extra carbon as root exudates, and this helps build soil for the long term. For completeness, let's also consider legumes. As with grasses or forbs, the above ground distribution of sugars during the bloom period goes approximately 10% towards reproduction and 40% towards biomass. The below ground distribution for legumes is somewhat between that of grasses and forbs, about 35% root biomass and 15% root exudates. This below ground ratio is variable for all types of plants, depending on a number of factors, but especially so for the legumes. The reason for the variation is the amount of sugar energy that legumes expend for nitrogen fixation, which will be greater in poorer soils. In very sandy soils or soils with low organic matter and or very low microbial activity, legumes will spend a lot more sugar energy on nitrogen fixation, and therefore more sugar is going into exudates than into biomass. Pasture management in light of all this. In talking with many pasture managers who have practiced the take half, leave half for years, decades even, in many different types of environments, from the Dakotas to Florida and everything in between, their experience has been that if they consistently practice take half, leave half, their pasture becomes dominated by grasses and have almost no forbs. The forbs, they don't survive. This is because when you take half and leave half, the grass has so much of its energy stored in the root system that it grows back very quickly. Forbs have less energy stored in their root systems, so they're outcompeted. And as we've just discussed, more grasses and less forbs means long-term soil organic carbon is not being built. The solution, and this is what happens in natural ecosystems, is occasionally stressing the grass very hard. I'm not suggesting doing this every year. It could be every couple of years, but occasionally you need to take the grasses all the way to the ground. Perhaps you take the grasses all the way to the ground and you even continue to graze on that ground for 2 weeks or so. You have to deplete the grass root systems. When you do that, when you graze this intensively for the remainder of that season and maybe the next year, depending on which part of the year you do this, you will get a proliferation of forbs. I've talked with dozens of grazers who have tried this. The common theme is that in the year after they graze their grasses very hard, there appears to be less forage biomass there. And there is less forage biomass. There's less yield per acre and there's less meat production per acre. But the following year, in year number 2 and thereafter, for a 3 to 5 year window, the meat production per acre is significantly higher than it was before the intensive grazing, in spite of the appearance of less forage biomass. When I talk about rangeland being dominated by forbs, I'm not suggesting that the forbs are the most visible plants. Forbs have a small amount of visible biomass compared to grasses. The pasture will still look like it's dominated by grasses in terms of the amount of biomass that's out there, but when you start doing a count of the number of plants per square meter, you'll see that you actually have a greater number of forbs than you do of grasses, even though the vegetative biomass for the forbs is less. But the common experience has been that when we have rangelands that are dominated by forbs, the conversion from forage to meat becomes much more efficient. Forbs are more nutrient dense than grasses. They have higher protein levels, higher mineral concentrations, higher energy levels overall, and they result in more meat production per acre, even though there doesn't visually appear to be biomass there to support that. Native ecosystems. I had the privilege of speaking on this topic at Joel Salatin's farm this summer for a Stockman grass farmer event. And we had a pretty fun conversation. Joel proposed changing the magazine's name to Stockman Forb Farmer, so I guess I was persuasive enough. Joel shared a conversation with an agronomist who described how they had evaluated several native prairies, which of course probably hadn't been managed in terms of grazing pressure the way we were prior to a couple of 100 years ago, but they still identified 1,600 different species of plants in the native prairie, of which only 60 were grass. The vast majority of the native species were forbs, along with some legumes. Species diversity comes from having forbs, and species diversity means diverse exudates, which means a diverse soil microbial community and long-term soil organic matter. When I was describing these different plant movements of sugars, Joel shared a story of mountain man Jim Bridgers, how he described in his diary crossing the western plains on horseback and riding through a herd of bison that it took 7 days to ride across. And if they hadn't packed feed for their horses, the horses would have starved because there was no grass. The bison had taken the grass down into the dirt. Does that sound like take half, leave half? So that is the article, Take Half, Leave Half, and the fallacy thereof by John Kempf, who, by the way, is a founder of Advancing Eco Agriculture. That's the name of his company, Advancing Eco Agriculture. And he's also the executive editor of Acres USA magazine. If you're not listening to John Kempf and you're interested at all in agriculture, whether regenerative or not, and you're missing out. John Kempf is one of my very favorite people in this space. One of these days I want to get him on the show, but that'll come later. But now we've got something new to think about. You know, there's people that actually suggest to take a third, stomp a third, and leave a third. Do you, after what John Kempf is saying, let's give it the benefit of the doubt. Maybe John's wrong. I don't think he is, but maybe John's wrong. But if he was right, would take a third, stomp a third, and leave a third help build carbon in the soil? No, it would even be worse. Take half and leave half is bad enough. You're not building long-term carbon in the soil. And that's where the Life Raft comes back into play. It's not, in my opinion, guys, it's not just root exudates. They are critical. Root dieback in the soil is critical. These things have to happen. But when you combine that idea with stomping recalcitrant carbon into the soil, then we get all manner of carbon that we need in the soil. We get the short-lived carbon, we get medium-lived carbon, we get long-term carbon, and then we get 10,000-year carbon. We get all the carbon. We're going to fill all the niches that any of these carbons could possibly, fill, right? Because short-term carbon is definitely going to be used as food for microbes. Long-term carbon, the 10,000-year biochar kind of carbon, the recalcitrant carbon, that's like apartment buildings for the microbes. It is. It's like it's so porous, and it holds all the water, and it holds all the nutrients, and it's got all these little nooks and crannies in it. It's got the 1 gram of this crap has a surface area of an NBA basketball court. That's a lot of surface area for 1 gram. And it's all folded in on each other. There's all these tubes and holes and these little pockets, and that's where the microbes live. And they end up being like this recalcitrant carbon, this biochar in the soil. It's like a coral reef in the ocean. You could go for miles in the ocean with just nothing but sand on the bottom. And we're talking like, let's say like 200-300 feet down below the surface of the water. And it's just saying there's no life there. No, I mean, there's some, but then you run into a coral reef and everything changes, doesn't it? There's thousands of species of fish and there's millions of them. There's 10,000 species of coral. There's crustaceans. There's mollusks. There's the whole food chain of the ocean is there. It's the same thing when you've got biochar in the soil. It ends up being a coral reef of life. And as it reproduces, it grows. That coral reefs grow in the ocean, and biochar does too. Once it's there, and we know this from the studies of terra preta, all of a sudden, somehow or another, it's almost as if the recalcitrant carbon starts to reproduce itself. There's many reasons why this occurs, but it's not like the carbon in the soil already is like somehow or another making itself into more carbon. It's attractive to things that contain carbon, like crustaceans and mollusks and life forms like bugs and earthworms and scarabs, and that all dies and it all gets stuck there. It gets glued onto the recalcitrant carbon and becomes more and more and more and more. And this is how we recharge our soils. And for every 1% of carbon that's in your soil, it's something like it will hold on an acre basis 620,000 gallons of water. Chemically. It'll chemically hold it. Will not allow it to run off. Well, if it gets into the soil and it gets into contact with the biochar, it will not allow it to run off. And it will also not very much give it up in cases of hot drying winds through evaporation. Because if the soil's if the carbon's underneath the soil, it's not exposed to the sun. It's not exposed to the heat. And even if it was, you better fight for that water molecule, because the stickiness of the carbon in the biochar is way more stickier than evaporation can be. And it also sticks to nutrients. It also sticks to bacteria. It sticks to all life that's in the soil. After years of a life raft moving through the grazing lanes and stomping raw carbon at the surface of the soil, plus a couple of other tricks that I got up my sleeve that we'll get into in another episode, what do you think is going to happen to dead and depleted soils after a few years? They're going to bounce back, and they're going to get better and better and better. And all the time, we're going to be taking thousands of pounds of meat out of this system. We're going to be taking thousands of pounds of walnut meat out of this system. We're going to be taking thousands of pounds of eggs out of this system. We haven't even scratched the surface. We're going to be selling lumber of all kinds. Some of it's going to be such at a premium price that by itself it would support the damn farm. But no, we're going to be selling meat and chicken meat and beef meat and goat meat and eggs and whatever else that we can get in there. We're going to have you pick fruit, because we're going to, at one point or another, I guarantee there's going to be blackberries and raspberries in the hedgerows, and there's going to be 50 miles of hedgerows. Actually, there's going to be like 100 miles of hedgerow. We haven't even scratched the surface. We're still on just what a silvopasture is. If you want more of these Cathedral series, consider supporting the show at bitcoinandshow.com, bitcoinandshow.com, and sign up. You could do it for free if you want, but if you want to support me where I can go out and buy food to shove in my pie hole so that I can bring you more of these, consider $50 a year. bitcoinandshow.com. That's bitcoinandshow.com. When you hit the sign up button, you'll have a chance to either go for free or go for $50 a year. Please do $50 a year. Help me out. I want to bring more of these to you. I am going to bring more of these things to you, but it would really help me out. Really, really help me out if you just kind of like do the donation thing. Support the show. Support your podcaster. Help me help you understand more about God's technology and what it can do for us without a single electron. Well, actually, that's not true. God's technology is filled with electrons. We just don't send them down copper wires. After that, though, We're going to be marrying some serious technology into this whole system. I didn't even really get to talk about the automated water cart, because the cattle's got to be watered, right? There's got to be water. Otherwise, the cattle they're not going to make it. So there's going to be automation in the water cart. There's going to be automation in the chicken houses. They're going to roll. I mean, the whole thing with the chicken houses that roll behind, they're automated, and they just kind of creep, and they're solar powered. It's a perfect place for solar power. It's a perfect application for solar power. I don't think solar power is very good for charging grids, but in situations like this, where I just got a huge barn and it's on wheels and I just need it to scoot along like 1 inch every minute or so, which I think would be a good rate, have them turn automatically all in unison, because there would be, I found some that are, we'll see, what is it? It's the Rova Barn 700. If you go to, it's www.ukkorobotics.com, ukkorobotics.com, ukkorobotics.com. You'll find it. It's the Rova Barn 700, and you'll be able to see a picture of what I'm talking about. They're 30 foot wide. They're 30 foot wide. It's perfect. It's freaking perfect. Let me make sure about that. Where's the thing? Yeah, it's 30 foot by 30 foot by 7.5 foot tall. I can put 5 of them right next to each other. Or I could put 5, well, actually I put 5 of them. They'd be staggered behind each other just slightly to make sure that the wheels would have clearance. They wouldn't all be side by side, but you get the point. And they can drive, I can program them to drive to where I want them to be. I wouldn't even need fencing. If I had e-collars on the cattle that were keeping them in place, and from what I understand, they work fine. And I've got chickens that are inside these barns that are essentially directly on the grass. You know, the whole barn is right on the grass, and the way that the system works is that it's got like, it keeps the chickens in, right? But it keeps them on the grass, and it just runs the whole thing very, very slowly, and it's solar powered. It's got its own water. It's got its own feed system. Dude, we don't even need step-in fencing at this point. And we get the entire effect of the Life Raft from one end to the other. And we might be able to do it 5 times in a year. And how much carbon can we put in? And how many different seeds can we put in? How much cattle can we raise? And how many chickens can we get? How many eggs can we get? And again, we haven't even scratched the surface of all the rest of the revenue streams that can come off the exact same 1,000 acres that is Cathedral. I'll see you on the other side. This has been Bitcoin and I'm your host, David Bennett. I hope you enjoyed today's episode and hope to see you again real soon. Have a great day.